Hey there, Internet. My name's Luxander, and today we're going to be talking about dealing with disappointment, how to deal with disappointment. This can apply to a number of things, and I know that I personally have had several very disappointing things happen in the last couple of years, and so it's one of those things where you kind of have to figure out how to deal with your feelings when people and things are letting you down. Maybe you've been subscribed to a YouTuber for a long time who you look up to and who is a positive example for how to live your life, perhaps as a queer person, and then you find out that they are abusive and manipulative to people in their personal life, and that's very disappointing. Or maybe you've been watching the same TV show for like a number of years, and you've spent a lot of your time being very invested in how the story is going to end, and you've been dissecting the writing to try to see what sort of hints you can get towards what's going to happen later on. And then they come in for the last 2 seasons and absolutely butcher the show that you loved. And just kidding, guys, this video is about Game of Thrones. I know I'm probably going to lose a lot of you now, but I just want to say that I am going to be talking generally about like how to deal with the disappointment of a thing, but it is going to be within the context of this show that I love so much, and I want to explain why it's so disappointing, and yeah, so this is going to be a little bit of a follow-up on my Game of Thrones ramble, and there will be spoilers, but if you don't care about watching the show, then feel free to watch this. I don't know. There's a great channel called Lindsay Ellis, run by this woman called Lindsay Ellis, she is making videos about the Game of Thrones ending and why it was so bad, and I would really recommend that anyone watch that. I'll put a link to it in the description. The main thing I want to pull from her video is that the creators of the show literally said that themes are for 8th grade book reports, so they were not interested in delivering on any of the themes that they had established and written in the beginning, and it is possible that they were trying to match up their ending with what the original author George R. R. Martin was doing, but they kind of pissed all over the idea of having a good resolution to the story, because when you set up things for seasons and seasons and then go a completely other direction, that's not honoring the setup, it's just trying to be cleverer than your audience, and it's not a good way to write a show. Anyway, go watch Lindsay Ellis's video about that and getting into the specifics. I really don't think you have to even like Game of Thrones to have an appreciation for what happened to the show, and I think that it is a very interesting look at what happens to a show as it develops, how the priorities of the showrunners can change over time to the point where the production company was willing to give them as much time and money as they needed to finish the show right, and they were like, nope, let's go make a Star Wars instead. And little did I know, when I made my last video right after the 2nd episode of Season 8, that Season 8, Episode 2 was the last good episode of the show. I want to try to divorce this from the books, and I do want to say I recognize that the showrunners may have been trying to honor George R. R. Martin's original ideas for the ending, but their show exists in a different universe than the books do, and a lot of the things that they did in the show did not work for the show when it comes to how the story was wrapped up. So Season 8, Episode 2 was the episode where basically everyone is in Winterfell awaiting the arrival of the White Walkers and their army of the dead. I loved that episode. I adored it because there were so many character moments and so many payoffs for build-up, and it really gave you a sense that, like, ooh boy, this next episode is going to be very intense. A lot of these people who I am very emotionally attached to are not going to make it. The show spent so much time and effort hammering in the idea that the Game of Thrones was meaningless compared to the greater threat of the White Walkers. And in my last video about this, I was theorizing what would happen in Episode 3 of Season 8, which is the Battle of Winterfell. It is the Long Night. They chose to do this last season in what I think is a backwards way. I theorized that they must lose the Battle of Winterfell so that the White Walkers would still be the ultimate threat at the end of the series, and the ultimate threat at the end of the series turned out to be a crazy woman with a dragon underneath her. Let's just not even talk about right now the ultimate character betrayal that was, but for now, I just want to focus on the fact that the White Walkers have been cast as the ultimate threat, the thing that is actually going to kill everyone when they're squabbling over who sits the Iron Throne. So you spend the entire show making that the framework for your White Walker battle. That's the framework of the show, is that, oh, these petty squabbles between these lords don't ultimately matter when death marches on the wall, when death marches on the kingdom. And then, in the end conflict, you have essentially a cheap kind of get-out-of-jail-free card by having Arya stab the Night King with her Valyrian dagger. Now, she is an assassin, and she is skilled and powerful and a grown-ass woman, and I appreciate all of these things about Arya. It's just not the conflict that had been built up, and the showrunners said, specifically, they said with their mouths that they went with Arya because it would not be expected by the audience, and I think that that's a disservice to your audience and to the writing that you have laid out so far in the show. How can you disrespect your own show that much? And So I think that that's one of the major failings of the show. I think that it is antithetical to the whole thing you've been saying the entire time, to say the White Walkers are the greatest threat to the kingdoms, and then to turn around and have that wrap itself up in the course of one episode. You have a lot of people who seem like they're going to die, and then they come out okay, because, oh, you gotta preserve them, you gotta keep them alive for the sake of going Daenerys versus Cersei, which is the actual ultimate conflict of the show. Well, I mean, the actual ultimate conflict of the show, you could say, is sort of Jon versus Daenerys, or Daenerys versus everyone around her. Again, character assassination, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that this show did not cash in on any of the promises that it made. Essentially, you are saying, this is the ultimate threat, but then it gets brushed aside, liquidated very easily compared to other battles that we've seen. It seems like there weren't that many people who died compared to, like, how do you have the entire Unsullied and Dothraki horde in King's Landing at the end of all this, when the Dothraki especially seemingly died in the episode with the White Walkers? Like, this has been deeply frustrating and disappointing for me, and I am now at a point where I have been very burned on this show that I've spent a lot of my time outside of the context of the show learning about it, and I understand a lot more about writing and theme because of this show. A lot of things that have seemingly been thrown back in my face as a viewer of the show, but I've been a little burned on it. I am still in the process of watching it through with a friend of mine, though, and we are in season 4, so while I, on my personal time, have needed some space from the show, I've also been watching it with this friend, and so I think I may have actually come to some conclusions about how to deal with the disappointment of it feels like being wildly disrespected by the showrunners, and I don't think that they respected their own material, which I think leads to the audience who is invested feeling very sort of ripped off, I guess, just very disrespected. And it's very difficult to watch season 4 Daenerys dealing with things and then realizing where they go with her in the end. You see these moments of deep empathy and compassion, and they do not match up with someone who would be willing to just torch King's Landing and burn innocent people in the street. They did not spend enough time developing that change in that character, so it feels like rushed character assassination to have a turn from deep empathy, deep caring, trying not to be a terrible person, to full-blown, I will destroy this city and all of the people who live in it. There was not enough time given to that character development, so it does not feel very fleshed out. But anyway, so I'm watching the show with my friend, and it is difficult to keep in mind where we are versus where we're going to be, but I think that's the most important way to deal with disappointment at the end of something or whatever. The example that I gave at the beginning of this video of having a YouTuber that you look up to, that's a real thing that happened for me. And so the similarity between those situations is that you really genuinely do have to get in your mind an appreciation of the things that you got from that the parasocial relationship in the instance with the YouTuber. There are positive things that came out of that, like my own self-acceptance and my own self-exploration. It's very important to keep in mind those positive things that you got out of something rather than focusing in so hard on the fact that you've been so deeply disappointed. It can genuinely feel like, here's the thing that has been good and positive in my life, and now it's ruined. You know, if half an onion is black with rot, then it's a rotten onion, and it can really feel like that with this show and with this, YouTuber and, all these examples of situations where people have just really let you down. So while I'm watching older episodes of the show and keeping in mind what's going to happen and knowing that is going to turn sour, essentially, it's still important to know that it's possible to enjoy the show or the whatever in the ways that it was positive, and keep that inside you, knowing that it gave you so much positive. It made you think. It made you think creatively. It made you theorize about what was going to happen. It got you interested in writing. It got you interested in dialogue. It got you interested in costume design or cinematography. Any of those things that you got from being interested and invested in a show or whatever it is, if it made you feel even for a moment like it's okay for you to be the way you are, like if Oberyn Martell being openly, proudly, swaggeringly bisexual made you feel better about being your best bi self, that still matters. It's still important, even if they crushed his head like a fucking egg. I think my ultimate point here is that whether it's a TV show or a YouTube personality or a Twitter influencer, just because you've been let down doesn't mean that there is no positive to look at, doesn't mean that there's not a benefit that you can look at. It sucks when your time and emotional investment and the value of those things gets just kind of tossed to the side in favor of shocking the audience or in favor of personal monetary gain, whatever it may be. It sucks a lot to have those things, especially those things which feel so deeply personal to you after so much of your investment just tossed in the dirt. It is possible, though, I think, to come out on the other side and realize that even though this does not feel good right now, in the moment that you're dealing with your problematic fave or your best favorite show turning into garbage, you must always keep in mind that for the time that you were invested in it, it gave you something valuable. There's a reason that you were so invested in the first place, and it's okay to feel like you've been betrayed if all of that time and emotional energy seems to have been for a waste in the end, but that again doesn't mean that it wasn't meaningful while it lasted. And with that, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and stop talking because I can't think of a better way to wrap this up than that. So that is gonna be all from me today. If you like this video, please give me pretty analytics to look at and comments to read. Find me on Patreon, subscribe to this channel, ring the bell for notifications, and I hope you have an okay day. Bye. Many thanks to the patrons who support this work, and a special shout out to The Gay Agenda, Amber Music, David Walter, Jenny Swindles, Gretchen Becker, Wellington Marcus, Pine Snake, Jess Zendrex, and Mr. Atheist.